Hey y'all, welcome to what may be the last weekly installment of accessorizing my Gatton CNC. Now let me explain that. As I record this, it's Saturday, November 11th, 2017. The holidays are literally right around the corner, so I'm going to have to shift gears a little bit and get into Christmas mode, which means I won't have time to be doing any accessorizing. For a while anyway. Now that doesn't mean that I'm not going to continue to make videos. I certainly will. I'm going to get back into software. And in fact, that kind of leads me to this week's episode. This week, I finally did it. I went ahead and I cut a big old gaping hole here in the front of my CNC table and laid down some T-track and a spoil board. Now, let me explain a couple things before we get into the video proper. Number one, I'm not going to be giving you any precise exact dimensions on how I did my spoil board. And the reason for that is because every build is different and everybody's needs are different. Now, if you're looking for help on how to space T-track or threaded inserts or something to that nature, it's generally accepted anywhere from 3 to 4 inches on center is pretty good, but everybody's needs and everybody's wants are different. I went ahead and I went with T-track because I figured in my situation it would be more versatile than threaded inserts. And I did consider threaded inserts, and I really went back and forth on this quite a bit. But for my purposes, for my uses, T-track would just be more versatile than threaded inserts would be. That's not to say I won't add threaded inserts in a few strategic spots down the road. I may very well. I just don't know right now. Also, you may not need this much T-track on your spoil board. I have 13 strips of T-track here. That's because I'm going to be setting up a lot of fixtures and a lot of jigs towards the center of my spoil board, and I'd like a little bit of versatility there as well. Now, I'll be putting links in the description box below to all of the parts and supplies that I use to include this T-track, which I got from Orange Aluminum. But for right now, let's go ahead and go inside, get on the computer, and I'll show you in SketchUp how I decided on this layout. Then we'll get out here and get to work. Now, when it came time to figure out the layout of my spoil board, I went back to my SketchUp drawing of the table. And I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to make sure that I could cover as much of the table with MDF as possible, but still give myself access to put a clamp or mount a fixture wherever I needed to. Now, so I came in and I drew the T-track in. Now, I got my T-track from a company called Orange Aluminum, and I'll put a link in the description box below. On Orange Aluminum's website, they have this little drawing right here, which gave me the outside dimensions of the T-track. So I went ahead and I drew kind of a representation. I didn't get super detailed inside here, but I drew the major dimensions of the T-track into SketchUp, then added the pieces as I saw fit. Now, one of the things that I definitely wanted to do was put a piece out here next to my linear rail so that I could put a clamp on this side here to hold down a workpiece. And the same was true here on the inside of my cutout. I wanted one flush with the inside of the cutout right here with this surface. Then once I had those two in place, I took a measurement from the center line of my drawing here to the center line of this one here, split the difference, and that located this piece. Then with these three in place in my drawing, I just added a piece of MDF in between them, and the dimensions kind of filled themselves in. And the same was true over here in the center inside the cutout area. Now these are spaced closer together than these are. And that's simply because I want to be able to mount one fixture here, then mount another fixture here, so that I could reference and cut two projects at the same time. Another thing to notice about this is my MDF strips do not run the full depth of the table. And the reason for that is when it comes time to surface my spoil board, this is the area that my gantry can't reach. My router can't touch anything back here. So if I were to run this MDF strip all the way to the back, when it came time to surface, only this area out here would be getting surfaced. This area would not. So that would leave a ridge right here where the area that I surfaced meets the area that I can't surface. So rather than deal with that ridge, which would basically throw off, well, the flatness, for lack of a better term, I just eliminated this area back here under that dead space behind the router bed. Now I did go ahead and let the T-track overhang extend past this MDF edge here by 3 inches, and that will allow me to mount a clamp here and hold down something towards the rear edge of the spoil board, or mount a parallel rule or something to that nature to reference off of on the back edge of the spoil board. So with this representation of what I want to build drawn up, I went out to the CNC and used the CNC itself to decide where this line was going to be, what this length was going to be, by mounting a Sharpie pen in the CNC and letting it draw its rearmost extent. Let's go outside onto the CNC itself and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now there's probably about 100 different ways to mark the extents of your CNC router, its capacity in X and Y. But probably the easiest way is to let the CNC do it. Did you know that a Sharpie pen with a couple of wraps of tape around it will fit nice and snug in a 1/2 inch collet? So that's what I'm going to do. Now I've got my Y axis run back to 1/8 of an inch away from tripping the limit switch. I figured that gives me enough of a cushion that I can do just about anything back here and not hit the limit too hard if I do hit it at all. So now let's just draw the line with the X. Limit switch. Now let's go the other direction. A spring would probably be a good idea. But what fun would that be? Okay, there's that limit. Z up. Sharpie out. And now I know the rearmost extent as well as a left and right extent. Now something that I failed to mention in that last clip was the reason for drawing that line across the back of my CNC with the Sharpie in my router. And that was, simply put, so I could get an approximate measurement of how long I needed to cut these MDF strips. By letting the CNC mark that black line across the back, I could just take my tape and hook it up here up front, measure back to that line. and that told me how long approximately I needed to cut these strips. That also gave me a reference for how long to cut these should I need to. So the first order of business was to make the cut with my circular saw. Then I cleaned up the corners with my oscillating multi-tool. Then took my hand router and trimmed the edge of the cutout, just the ends, flush with that T-track. Then I let the CNC cut the front edge. Yes, it is the first official cut, but I was doing it manually with my Xbox 360 controller. This way I could make absolutely certain that the front edge of the table cut was parallel with my X-axis. Then I took my little belt sander file and squared up the two corners on the inside of the cutout. Then with a V-bit installed in the CNC, I went ahead and I routed thin line across the back and used that line to cut my MDF to length. Then I went ahead and I attached the T-track to the tabletop. Now this step, I'm sure, freaks a few people out. Yes, I glued the strips of MDF down to the table, and yes, I drove screws through the top of the MDF. We got to remember, folks, this is a spoil board. It's gonna get cut up, it's gonna get screw holes put in it. That's what it's meant to do. It takes the bullet, as it were, to prevent the bit from cutting into the table itself. So I have no problems with driving these screws into the top of the table through the spoil board. Then I used the CNC again to come along and trim the front edges of those MDF strips parallel with the Z-axis travel. I then moved it to the back and used the CNC to trim the back edges of all those MDF strips to make sure they were nice and parallel to the travel of the X-axis. You'll notice that I have the T-track removed for this step. Then after letting the glue cure for 3 days, I came back and removed all those screws from the top of the spoil board. Now the bit I'm using to surface my spoil board is this Freud 1¼ inch diameter bit. Technically it's a straight mortising bit, but it does work very well as a makeshift fly cutter. So the first order of business was to get out my triple edge finder, and after securing the bit, set my Z0 to the top of the table. Then I went ahead and started machining away. Now I ended up doing 5 passes, taking 20 thousandths off per pass. And you can see here that I need to work on my dust collection. That's one of the accessories I'll be adding down the road a little bit. So that's how I came up with the spacing, laid down the spoil board, then surfaced it. Now, I'll be releasing a companion video to this one, showing you how I got into VCarve Pro and created the toolpath that I used to surface this spoil board. It sounds real intimidating, but it's actually quite simple so long as you remember a couple of things. But again, that's for the next video. If you got anything at all out of this video, please hit that thumbs up button down there. And if you'd like to follow along and see what all I'm doing out here in the shop, consider subscribing to my channel. Now, whether you subscribe to me or not, hit that little bell button down there next to the subscribe button. and set your notifications so that you'll be notified when I release a new video. Now, I've put some links in the description box below. Number one, to Dave Gatton's homepage, where you can get some information on a Gatton CNC kit of your own. I've also put a link to the website article that accompanies this video on my website, marklindseycnc.com. And I've also put links in the description box to all of the parts, supplies, and tools that I used to lay down this spoil board, then surface it. So, whether you subscribe to me or not, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and y'all take care.